Hello, welcome to Moonstruck Podcast produced by Riot Radio. I'm Ryan, and today we'll be discussing time warped fields, general relativity, light, sound, and the air, and the Son of God is in terms of kind of misconceptions maybe around the classical depiction of Son of God that is sometimes referred to in the Bible. So we're going to be getting into relativity and time warp fields in the first segment of our show. And I really feel like this is a very pivotal concept, and I know today's episode might be a bit complex, but I think it's imperative that we kind of understand these very fundamental laws of nature, and sometimes the most fundamental things in life can actually present themselves to be the most complicated. So having an understanding that we should not overlook kind of the fundamentals of things like gravity and time is kind of important to understand really how we move in the world and why the world is shaped the way it is. So we're going to get into kind of Einstein and his concept of the mesh of space-time and it bending, and gravity acting as something that is a curve almost of space-time. As we can see in the left-hand corner, we see the sun, which is a very massive object. And what Einstein kind of equated is that when you have energy and when you have mass, these forces actually bend this fabric or mesh of space-time, and it creates actually the flow of time itself. So understanding that elsewhere in the cosmos there might not be this bend, so to speak, in this fabric that allows for time to move in one direction, especially on Earth. This is kind of important to understand that laws might exist where time moves traversably in other places of the universe, in other places of the cosmos. So the bending and kind of this warping effect of space-time is really what we're trying to get at today in our first segment. And what this is kind of getting into is that when you have a dense object like the sun, maybe we can just go back to that first image actually. When you have a dense object like the sun, what it is doing is actually warping this mesh. And if you can almost think of it like the sun is a denser object than Earth, and it has a denser gravitational field, or a stronger gravitational field rather. So the time in which the sun is operating with is actually slowed down in comparison to how we view time. We're actually moving relatively fast or quick in time compared to the sun. And why this is important is because we have to cultivate the understanding that we live in a medium between this traversable space-time, which moves fluid, such as you can see in the fabric, like where the sun and the earth are not sitting in the diagram. It's flat, so time is traversable there. But when you have these bends, time moves slower and slower and slower depending on the mass of the object. So ultimately, this is the effect known as gravity. And as I said, the Earth is in a medium in between the sun and the traversable space-time, which is not bent. So we are actually in a medium that is seeing things played out in a, I would say, energetic medium in which you can see this flow of time. Because if there was no time, then you would just be able to pop to wherever you wanted in the universe. But we're obviously here for a reason. We're here to learn. And that can really only happen if we understand this one-directional flow. And this is important because we cultivate things like memories and we cultivate things like karma and stuff through a reality where time is moving fluidly in one direction. So the purpose of understanding why we operate in this medium in relativity to the sun is because the sun is ultimately the densest or the heaviest mass in the solar system when it comes to these planetary objects. So we're gonna kind of get into the eccentricity of the movement of the Earth's revolution around the sun, which is also important because we can kind of see this mirrored in some places of physics. I'm not going to say it's exactly the same, but we can see mirrored effects in physics when we look at things like subatomic particles, like electrons moving in revolution around the nucleus of the atom. And why this is important to understand is because if we think of almost the nucleus of the atom as the sun and the electrons as Earth, Earth is moving with a much higher speed than the sun is when we think of this orbit or this revolution. So if you have a dense object in the solar system like the sun, that is always going to take the first place of energy in the solar system. And everything is going to move in relativity to that because it has the most energy, it has the most mass, it produces the most amount of light and energy in different forms. Actually, we're gonna get into thermal energy. We're not gonna get into nuclear fusion and fission today because this episode is already gonna be complicated enough. So I think that might be next episode or a future episode. However, when we come back to this idea of the sun and it being the center of the solar system, or you can think of the center of the atom, this basically focal point which everything moves around, it's important that we understand that we're moving in relativity to something else, a much higher energetic medium, in the sense that the sun is producing actually so much energy through nuclear fusion that is actually released as thermal energy, and it's warping the fabric of space-time itself. And it is essentially releasing it. Well, the sun is really just a big ball of gas, of plasma, and that plasma, which we refer to as solar wind, that hits the Earth's electromagnetic field, actually is what gives life to all these creations on Earth, like human beings, like plants. They need sunlight, obviously, to grow. And not just that, but everything we see around us, all the technology we use, everything from phones to televisions is operating through this magnetosphere and ionosphere of the Earth, which actually uses these solar winds to allow these frequencies to intermingle with each other and transmit messages across the Earth. You know, you wouldn't be able to pick up your phone and call John in China or wherever if, you know, we did not have this field, right? Well, we would not even be alive to begin with, but that's the explanation for why this is kind of important, why we have this medium of the Earth called the atmosphere, which can kind of digest this radiation or mitigate it in a way where we can actually utilize it for life and for inventions on this planet. So understanding that we move in relativity to other things is important because it really emphasizes the idea that the more you are vibrating, or the more speed you have, or the more energy or mass you have, the more influence you have on the reality around you. And that's what Einstein was kind of getting at. And also, I don't want to forget this, that there's links in the description to the general theory of relativity, specifically page number 162, when we're talking about the warping of space-time and the curvature in which allows time to move in different ways. So this effect is actually called time dilation. And this eccentric movement of the Earth around the sun actually kind of alludes to a much bigger theme also too, which is really comes down to the heart of the cosmos and the heart of E equals mc squared, which is because we're moving in relativity to such a dense object like the sun, but we're moving in a medium between it and the space-time continuum in its flat, unaffected state, we're actually able to observe this flow of time and see things in a perception different from the rest of the cosmos. So you can almost think of it as if we were living in that traversable space-time, which is flat, like the flat fabric that Einstein was talking about, that you can pop back and forth in time. You can probably snap your fingers and go back to see the Great Pyramids because you don't have this gravitational pull that's affecting you, that is stronger than the energy that we emit. So we are, in a sense, almost a conscious energy medium between this flow, so that we can observe things in the outside world. We can observe life. If everything was instantaneous, there would be no reason for creation in the first place, because everything would just be in a purely energetic state, which is malleable very easily because it doesn't have external forces acting on it. So I know everybody is kind of wondering, what's the impact of this in our lives, Ryan? Get to the point. But understanding that this is such a fundamental part of reality is important for us getting to that higher level where we understand more things. People often ask why do we always have to encounter this situation that seems to reoccur in life, like maybe you have a bad history with relationships or something, what we usually describe as karma. It's because we're moving in an eccentric movement, which is one flow. It's, we go around the sun. The Earth moves around the sun one year, one Earth year, that is. And if you think about that, it's almost like thinking that this cycle repeats every year because we're in a different alignment with all the planets, pretty much every step of that year. So I don't know if we could go to the next image up in the left-hand corner of the solar system, which basically shows like all the planets, and we could see Earth is this little blue marble way up there, and it's not even close to the biggest planet in the solar system, and those are all small in comparison to the sun. So when we really think of this little blue marble, similar to the electron, moving in this revolution around this big planetary object, we can kind of see how we are just in a cycle. And this is what is kind of referred to the karmic cycle. And when you release this karma, you are releasing energy, you're releasing matter, because that's what Einstein talked about. He was talking about E equals mc squared, the relativity between light mediums and mass and energy. So when we kind of understand this principle that you do have basically a much larger force affecting you, and that we are just in a medium that is so infinitesimally smaller than that, like the electron, because as we know in science, or as science tells us rather, the nucleus, or for example, let's take hydrogen. If you think about hydrogen, it has one proton in the nucleus of that atom, and that one proton actually is equal to 1 unit of subatomic mass. The electron is registered at almost 0. So if you think about the Earth in that same kind of setting, we have very small influence on fields like the sun and on space-time compared to these bigger gravitational mass. And let's not forget that the sun is like a baby star in comparison to some of the other things out there in the cosmos when we talk about black holes and singularities and neutron stars, things with very dense gravity that is multiple times stronger than, hundreds of times stronger than anything in our solar system. So understanding that really gives you a perspective when it comes to this warping effect. And this mesh, which is distorted by the sun, it's actually important to understand this, because when we think about the sun, we're talking about light in a vacuum medium, because the sun is producing light, and it's basically converting hydrogen nuclei into helium, or helium nuclei. And the reason why this is important is because we're dealing with very light elements. Helium, lighter than the air by I think 14 times or something like that. Or no, that's hydrogen. And helium's like 7. So both of those are way lighter than the air, and they're being burned up inside the sun. And the sun is just a big ball of gas, of plasma. It's been doing this for thousands of years. And, we might think that, oh yeah, Earth has existed for so long. But to the cosmos, it's just like that. We're living in a time that is relative to us. And when we understand that the perception of the cosmos is different than our perception, we really get that bigger picture view of the world and what is really out there. Because we have to have an understanding that things like plasma, ionized gas, and a baby star is giving us life. And if you take that away, boom, we would cease to exist. Simple as that. And, this thermal energy, as I said, that is produced by the sun, well, it's actually nuclear energy, which is being converted into thermal energy. But you can't have sound in a vacuum. So the expression of sound, if you think about when I hit this table, that's producing sound waves because I'm having a contact with the table, and there's repulsion going on here because of the normal force. And when my fist hits the table, the atoms in my fist actually come very close to the atoms in the table, but due to the electromagnetic forces at play, the atoms repel each other strongly when they come in close proximity. And this repulsion manifests as the normal force to prevent my hand from just passing through the table. So the vibrations, the impact that is generated from my hand hitting the table actually produces vibrations in the table, and the vibrations actually act as mechanical waves that travel through the material of the table, and the energy from that impact is transferred into these waves, which we call sound waves. And that causes everything around it to be vibrated as well. You would not hear that sound if we didn't have air surrounding us, because the sound that travels through the table travels into the air molecules, and it vibrates them as well, and that's why we hear the sound. But in a vacuum, in outer space, near the sun, where there is no air, we don't have this effect of sound. So, the sun is plasma, lightning is plasma. We hear lightning because there is an air medium, and lightning is breaking the sound barrier, so we can hear it on Earth. We can't hear any of those sources of plasma in a vacuum. But understanding, this is the important part, that energy is still present is important, because that leads to the warping effect, right? So, a lot of big concepts. Even I'm struggling to keep up, but it's okay. We can slow down a bit and just take a second to kind of maybe digest that a little, that energy is moving through these different mediums, and we have air on Earth that can allow transfer of energy through a medium, because we are not communicating probably like higher beings do out there in the cosmos. They probably communicate through telepathy and through, like direct conscious interaction. But we are not that advanced right now. So what we do is we are reverberating the air, and we are actually, that's how we talk and communicate with each other. We're vibrating the medium of the air and producing sound waves which other people can hear. So understanding that all these little things like light, sound, and the air actually produce this cosmic expression on Earth is imperative to understanding just how big the cosmos really is. And that's really what this episode is about, if nothing else, because I understand that there's a lot of information here which is going to be very mind-boggling to a lot of people and perhaps too much to digest. The goal is not to get to get everybody to understand everything in this episode today. The purpose is to get us to think on that higher level of thinking and think from a perspective outside of ourselves, which is always what this show is about. Understanding that there's greater forces at play, greater forces of nature, and that, when man creates something like a cell phone, we think this is the end all and be all. This is garbage. This doesn't matter. There is forces out there in the cosmos that would let you psychically communicate with other people, and we think that scrolling on TikTok is like the greatest invention of all time, but it's not, right? The goal here is to widen our perception. So kind of think about some of those ideas. I'm gonna take a sip of water. See, even silence can be just so peaceful. But the reason why we get into things like, this medium of the air is because this atmosphere, this buffer that we have that protects us from the solar wind and allows for us to send signals through our phone and whatnot, this is imperative, really, for the preservation of life on this planet, because it buffers us from all these energies. But understanding that these energies still exist, they're just mitigated by this medium of the atmosphere. And that's why when we go out in the sun, we feel re-energized, because we get serotonin and all these other neurotransmitters produced, and we're surrounded by an energetic field. And that's why they tell you, oh yeah, you gotta put on sunscreen or whatever when you go outside. Well, not that you really need it if you understand the full mechanics of how things work, but we understand that there are forces acting on us that, if we're not conscious of, they can impact us in ways that we don't want them to. So understanding that this atmosphere does act as a field buffer to these energetic particles that are being produced by the sun, and these ions and plasma and radiation, it's important. So the air also produces, as I said, this echo medium where we can talk to other people using the mechanics of our body. As I said, we're reverberating the air. Think of in a instant, if that ability to do that was gone, we'd be back to square one on Earth. If there was no medium for us to reverberate things through. But we do have this medium, and we should understand why it's so important to have these concepts around us, because ultimately we are interacting with that field of energy every second. And there's energy from the sun in that medium all over the place. There's little bits of energy all over the Earth, and all we need to do is learn how to interact with it in a precise and accurate way. And then from then on, you have a clear understanding of why you're here on Earth, not only what your purpose is, but what your potential is to actually accomplish. Somebody who can understand this has the ability to almost do anything they want once they set their mind to it. And that's not going to say you're going to be void of blocks in life or anything like that. It means you have a better understanding of your place in the universe as a being who can be conscious of all these crazy energetic phenomenons going on. We're literally witnessing the flow of time itself by, essentially sitting on an electron that's revolving around a nucleus. That's not exactly the physics of it, but you can almost think about it in that way, because that's essentially what's happening. We're revolving around something that's much bigger than us, is much more powerful than us, and it's warping the fabric of space-time. And we are on a smaller medium in which we can see time move at a different speed than it does on the sun. We can see it move faster, and through that we can actually witness other things and interact with the universe in a way that's more freeing than if we were living in a denser medium where gravity is stronger. Maybe our potential to do things would not be as advanced as it is now. So these fundamental concepts are a real starting point. I know that's funny to say, is a real starting point when we start off with a relativity, but as I said, I'm just trying to get us familiar or associated with the concept of digesting big ideas, because we're going to be talking about a lot of complex topics on this show. It's not always going to be as complex as this, but understanding that the fundamental nature of the reality in which we live in is complicated. And it doesn't have to be by any sense. Like, once we are at peace with that and have an understanding that in the cosmos things are much bigger than us, once we understand that there is a universe, a whole universe of things out there which have much more potential than we do, but we are in a medium, we are conscious mediums that can interact with that field, then you have infinite potential. You have the whole power of the cosmos behind you. And, you shouldn't be slowed down really by, anything that TikTok garbage has to offer, or, Instagram scrolling, or whatever it is, right? I'm not saying don't do any of those things. I'm saying that we are beings who are always meant to be beyond these things. We're always meant to see from a higher perspective. We're always meant to innovate. We're always meant to create. We're always meant to express ourselves and have an understanding that we might be just a cosmic anomaly, but it doesn't really matter, because if you're doing what you feel is authentic and makes you feel genuine, and something that you feel is important, then are you really wasting your time ever? And are you really going to come closer to all of these pitfalls that young people seem to step into nowadays, like depression, like addictions, like distractions? No, because you're going to be focused on the concept that everything that is happening is for your benefit. And when you kind of realize that, you realize that you have an infinite potential to create. And I think that's what man has always done. Man has always created. And having an understanding that creating and innovating and going to that next level is imperative to us becoming that fuller, more unified version of ourselves really is the main point of being alive in the first place. So, as I said, it's not a cakewalk after you figure that out by any means, but it puts you in a position to realize that you have much more ability to do things than you might feel you do. So why is this energy of the sun, this plasma and this ion sphere and magnetosphere, an energy medium in which we absorb this energy important? And it's important because if you think of, for example, let's think of solar panels, right? What do? They take solar radiation and they convert it into energy in which we can run things, right? And that's a form of clean energy. And we are essentially working on similar mechanics. Like, we're not doing it exactly the same way as plants do, or perhaps as efficiently as plants do. But when we wake up, when we see sunlight, when we interact with it, there is hormones, neurotransmitters produced, like serotonin, that tell us that, okay, we need to be alert and aware now. And the sun gives us that. That's the most genuine source of serotonin likely on this planet, just going outside, interacting with the sun. And that's not such a big thing to do, right? Like, a lot of us think that, everything maybe needs to be some kind of complicated process. And I know how ironic that might sound like when we are discussing these very big concepts, but things can be as complicated as we break them down into. But ultimately, when we step back and take a look, all we have to see is that everything is going like clockwork. And if you position yourself in the right place and adjust your mechanics just the right way, then you're going to be in the exact position you want to be in. And it's really not that difficult a concept to understand when you understand that we have a medium of energy in which energy is just available to us. It's just sitting there. And the atmosphere, as I said, absorbs it. And we act almost like solar panels in which we can, perceive light. And what do we do with light? We can create mental images. We can say, okay, I want to build something. Like, I keep bringing this thing up this episode. This thing was like not even a concept probably 100 years ago. And now we have phones in our hand, right? How'd that happen? Somebody thought it up in their head. They visualized an idea and then they made it happen. But without that fundamental ability to visualize things, which is a basic, it's a basic human nature, which is really propelled by this ability to manipulate light or visualize things, because that's the only way we can perceive anything. In the beginning, God said, let there be light. And, he was right, because light is how we interact with things. There wouldn't be mediums of air or anything without light. So I'm not even going to get into the idea how when light hits a vacuum medium like outer space, it, creates almost this vibrational reverberation in which things can be created, which is probably how we got here. But understanding that we are kind of the solar panels of Earth in some sense is important for us really realizing our potential to interact with this energetic field that exists beyond us. I know that's a difficult concept for kind of human beings to like naturally understand ideas beyond us, because typically from if we look at history, human beings are not really we don't like change. We do it over time because we're kind of forced into it. But if we can learn to be more comfortable with that process of flowing through things, then we can adapt, we can grow more, we can understand more, we can expand. What does light do? It expands. And we're not going to, as I said, we're not going to get into transmutation today, but when we talk about nuclear fusion and fission, how do you think any of that stuff happens? Like, we're talking about very fundamental concepts that interact with light all the time, light and energy and mass. So those are the concepts of fusion and fission. We're talking about taking two things and making them one when we're talking about transmutation, right? So understanding that we have a light field around us, and if we can only configure it in the right way, if we can only interact with it and communicate through it in the right way, then we can harness almost that electron eccentricity of that revolution around this bigger focal point, this atomic structure, which we refer to as the sun. So let's go to, I'm going to kind of take this back to let's dial this back a bit to maybe a bit simplified terms, or maybe a analogy rather. Oftentimes this is a concept in spirituality, but I think in some works of religion there have been some misconceptions or some alterations in the viewpoint of the interpretations of things like what Jesus said is, Son of God and stuff like that. We're talking about not the Son of God like Father and Son. Well, maybe in one sense we are, but in another sense we're talking about the Son of God as in the individuality of our Son. If we think about why we are even here, maybe as beings of Earth, why would we even exist in the first place? Perhaps it's to liberate ourselves from being just a part of a circuit. Maybe we are always meant to liberate ourselves from that circuit. And how do we do this? We have to understand our individuality and understand how our medium, how our individuality as beings of Earth interacts with the field. So when we can understand everything in relativity, this is that big word that comes back around with Einstein and, E equals mc squared in relativity to us, especially general relativity, because on Earth and on the sun, we're talking about these mediums with gravity. We're not talking about the special theory of relativity. We're talking about the general theory of relativity. So there is a lot that goes into this, and understanding that when we can interact with forces that are fundamental to nature, because nature interacts with all these forces all the time, but we typically as human beings come along and we see something that nature does, like grow things, and we think we can do it better by growing things in a lab or whatever. Nature has been at this stuff for thousands and thousands of years, and understanding that the likelihood that we're going to best nature at its own game is likely not going to happen unless we have an understanding that we are nature and connect with what it means to be in nature and be a part of nature. We're talking about I think this was actually said in, I think it was Nick Fury who said this, that a man can accomplish anything when he realizes he's a part of something bigger. So understanding that idea, that being a part of something bigger, not something bigger, being a part of something bigger, is fundamental for us reaching our full potential, whatever that is. I mean, I don't have all the answers. I don't think any of us do. But as I said, this is just a process of learning and growing and expanding and changing and traversing one thing into the other. Transmutation, we interact with these forces all the time. We're constantly, skin cells on us are constantly dying and new ones are being grown. How does that happen? Well, we're interacting with forces, we're interacting with energy. Just because we can't, always think about, okay, grow new skin cells, grow new skin cells, grow new skin cells, it doesn't mean that it's not happening. It just means that we're not being conscious of it. We're not realizing it. And by not realizing it, we lose that ability to do things like, consciously heal ourselves. Why, everybody seems to be getting sick these days, and getting various unexplained diseases because we don't understand how to interact with our body and biology. We think that we can just like muscle things into working. In the movie Doctor Strange, it said that you can't beat a river into submission. You need to surrender to its current and use its power as your own. So, but understanding that we are part of the river, part of the flow, you can move to a higher state once you understand that, and you can transmute the flow. Because what is the sun? Sun's a big ball of gas, plasma in the sky, fire. So fire, from the very beginning of time we're talking about now, like creatures on Earth have always been obsessed with fire. Like the cavemen were like grunting, like and talking about like fire or grunting to each other rather about fire from like the very beginning of time. So understanding that these concepts like fire and like plasma and like the sun and like energy are very fundamental. Even if the cavemen couldn't express what fire was, they knew like it was something to, jump up and down about and get excited about because they knew there was something there. And that's essentially what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to look at this in a sophisticated way and say that, okay, we have studies, we have information, we have physics, we have journals, we have all these sources of information that tells us something is there, and now we can understand it and we can utilize it. What were they doing? They were using fire to cook their food because they didn't have barbecue, and they didn't have stoves back then, they didn't have microwave. So you'd rub two sticks together and create fire, right? So anyway, point is that these forces have always existed and we've always been fascinated with them, but realizing how we interact with them and how to understand them in a way which is relative to us. If we think of, like, as I said, transmutation, if we think of something transforming, what does fire do? It takes something, it burns it up, and produces carbon and all these other like soot and stuff like that. And it's some transforming something from one form into the other. It's not perfect transmutation like we talk about in physics, but it is a form of transforming something from one form into the other. And that concept is fundamental to nature. They talk about in Chinese philosophy the elements of fire, water, earth, and air. Why is that important? Because they've always been there, they're always going to be there, and they give the ability for us to interact with energy mediums. So if, like, for example, if we took away fire right now, let's just say just from the earth, you're probably not cooking on a stove anytime soon. So it means you're going to have a big problem heating up food. That's a very fundamental thing to nature. So understanding that these forces literally enable us to not just live, but live our lives the way we do is imperative. And when we get back to that idea of Son of God, finding our own individuality, understanding what these things are in relativity to us, we're talking about concepts much bigger than us. And when we really learn how to utilize that, we have the ability to look at them in new ways, use them in new ways, understand them in new ways. And what does that do? It gives us the ability to invent and create and understand what human beings have always done. It comes back around to the same idea. And that's why it's so funny that we talk about this eccentricity or eccentric movement of the Earth, Earth's revolution around the sun, is because we're talking about things moving in relativity to something else. So I think that maybe just take a second to digest that. I'm going to take some more sips of water. This is so pivotal when we talk about all these things. And I mean, also, there's a link here. If you want, I forgot that if you wanted to look into time warp fields, this one's from the Anderson Institution, and it's on time warp fields. And then I linked some ones by NASA and another physics journal that talk about the ozone layer and how that actually makes radiation, UV radiation, solar radiation, and the energy that is produced by the solar winds digestible for the planet and for our life. And it also gets in, the other physics journal also gets into the magnetosphere and how that works. So if you want to look at them, you can look into that. And as I said, this is something so fundamental to being human, being a part of nature, understanding that we are connected to a moving marble in outer space that's in orbit around a bigger marble that's essentially on fire, and that's warping the fabric of this vacuum that is essentially nothing. Is that's a big concept to understand. But if you can understand that, I feel like you can understand a lot, or you have the ability to understand a lot, because you're understanding that there's so many moving pieces in a dynamic that is that complicated, that the rest of the cosmos must have mysteries, must have wonders out in it that maybe perhaps human beings on this planet might never reach. But that's okay, because we should be okay with what we have now. There's these fools who want to go to other planets and stuff like that, and cultivate Mars and all this garbage. And it's like, what's the point? We have everything we need right here. All we have to do is not take advantage of it and actually understand what we have. Like, we have so much potential right here on Earth, and yet we want to go to other places. Like, I understand exploring the moon. It's we can see Earth from a different perspective, and we can find out if there are any aliens there. I'm not saying there are. I'm just messing with you guys. But I think that there is so much to explore right here on the ground, and if we would only take the patience, if we would only take a breath and take it all in, take in the whole experience of what is going on around us. Trees, the wind, fire, water, sound. Seeing if you guys are paying attention. I'm just kidding. But there's so much going on around us, and if we can only unlock our mind to it, open ourselves, try to realize something beyond ourselves, understand what it means to interact with God, or be a creation, be the greatest creation of God. It's said in the Bible, or that we are the greatest creation of God, right? He created what? He created the archangels, which are made from light. And then, all these other beings, there's, jinn and demons and fire, which is, really they're a derivative of man, because they take on the form of the shape in man's heart. But understanding that those beings are, why does he say that we are the greatest creation? Is because we have the ability to interact with all these forces in nature and create and innovate and do things. That is fundamental. So I think we're gonna wrap it up soon, because we have covered a lot today, and I know I've gotten a bit, maybe I wouldn't say hysterical, but excited rather about the concepts today. It's because we're talking about something so bigger than us. And if we can only open our minds to it, if we can stop scrolling like an idiot on social media garbage, if we can stop looking at our phones, like, people who are literally burying their head in the sand to a whole world going on around them, then we can unlock the secrets of the universe. So it's all there waiting for you. Really, that's what it comes down to. It's all there waiting for you, and all you have to do is understand really who you are, what you are, and where we are, So that, like, those are like the big W questions right here. We're getting back to fundamental things right here. So understanding, when we've covered where we are, today, and that's actually part of what I named the script of this episode. Where are we? Because we are in a time warped field. We are moving through an energy medium that is relative to the sun and is outside the normal flow of the space-time continuum of traversable space-time. We're moving under the influence of another object so we can witness things happening. If I don't know, if there was like a purgatory, for example, they talk about in Catholicism, this concept of purgatory, this in-between place between hell and heaven and all the realms. It's adjacent to all the realms. Would we not be here? Like, is this not it? Like, are we not in a place where we can understand and grow and release karma and see all that the world has to offer in its, moments of, darkness where it falls into chaos, and in the moments of light where it breathes into creation? Like, we're talking about very fundamental things here, and if we can only understand the nature of life and the most complicated things in the universe are the most fundamental, we really have that big picture view. And I think that once we have that big picture view, you realize that you have a lot more power and a lot more ability to influence your life than you ever thought possible. And once you understand that, you're really on the road to self-development, understanding who you are and your place in the universe. And I'm not telling you to do this because you should do it, or, this is my perspective, right? Ultimately, this is the way I live my life. And if you resonate with this, as I always say, if you resonate with this, you can take this and utilize it. Run as far as you can with it. Run as fast as you can. But if you choose not to, that is still ultimately your decision, and one you will have to see the nature of. So either way, you're learning. And at the end of the day, that's what's important. And I think that we are put in a lot of positions in life that allow us to learn and grow and see the dynamics in which things work and be vulnerable and realize the nature of our ego and realize the fragileness of, human beings. And we're also just meant to explore and meant to experience. And when we really get a true understanding for what that is, then we can truly flourish into what we're meant to be. And I think we're all still understanding that, including myself. So I think we'll wrap it up today because we did cover a lot. We covered pretty much everything from the warping of space-time to when my hand hits a table and there's sound. Maybe we can, I don't know, it's probably a bit late, but maybe we can get the normal force description up there of the box. So, my hand hits the table, boom, sound waves reverberating through the air. So, it's, as I said, so many different concepts that we can go into. You could take that down, but so many different concepts that we can go into, and I'm just here to explore with you guys. So, this has been Moonstruck. And I'm Ryan, as I said, here on Riot Radio. And, hope to see you guys next time. I hope you learned something, and peace.